I promise my talk will be lighter than Lila's. We get to look at cute pictures now of happy animals. Okay. So yes, enrichment in shelters. You already know this, so I'll skip past that if I could get this to work. There. Okay. And again, given the work that I do with my team, one of the main activities that we have now is developing and implementing enrichment programs in our emergency shelters. And so we've had a lot of experience now doing our best to keep animals that are in pretty impoverished situations for lengthy periods of time, trying to keep them sane and happy. So, meeting the behavioral needs of animals in shelters. This came up yesterday in our conversations at the end of the day of how more and more we're looking at animals that are older, that have behavior concerns coming into the shelters rather than the cute little puppies and kittens that fly out the door. We're now talking about having animals for longer periods of time. And because of that, really the onus is on us to do our best to meet the needs of these animals and to acknowledge the whole animal, that we're talking about caring for it physically, as behaviorally and physically, not just looking at keeping the animal physically healthy. We need to keep the animal mentally healthy as well. Certainly, just looking at length of stay information from various shelters, and the ones that are including more behavior modification efforts in their programs, average length of stay is somewhere around 27 days and up in many cases. In our cases where we're dealing with cruelty case victims, usually the minimum that we're holding these animals is 90 days. And we have had cases go much longer than that. So it really is in our interest and our responsibility to do what we can for these animals. So you're probably familiar with the 5 freedoms that have been developed by the Farm Animal Welfare Council in the UK, and Dr. Miller talked about this in the workshop, that if this is what we're expecting people to do for farm animals, surely we should be expecting the same for our shelter animals. And we have always done, I'm sure, in most shelters, a very good job of dealing with the first 3, making sure the animals have adequate nutrition and access to water, and they're not in pain, and their injuries and disease have been taken care of. But the last 2 certainly have not received much in the way of attention from shelter people until the last few years, really. The freedom to express normal species-typical behavior and freedom from fear and distress. So those are the 2 that we're going to be focusing on. Traditional shelters usually are set up so there's very little opportunity for animals to express their normal repertoires of behavior. So one of the things that we want to do in our enrichment programs is focus on that. How do we provide opportunities for these animals to do what they would normally do? And then, of course, animals coming into shelters usually experience abnormally high levels of stress. And there are a number of reasons for that. Clearly it's a novel environment and potentially a frightening environment. They have complete lack of control over what's happening to them. If they have been a pet, they're experiencing that separation from the social attachment figures that they'd had. There are extremely high levels of noise, sometimes in excess of 100 decibels. So yeah, it's not surprising that they're highly stressed. A study a number of years ago looked at behavioral indications of stress and cortisol levels They measured cortisol levels in dogs coming into the shelter, and they measured them on the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the sixth day, up to 9 days, and then they measured it less frequently past 9 days. And what they found was that the levels on those first 3 days were significantly higher than dogs that had been in the shelter for more than 10 days. And they also, as a control group, measured cortisol levels in pet dogs in their homes. And also, it wasn't until after those first 3 days that the levels started to gradually decline to the point where they reached the same levels as dogs in pet homes. So that's one of the reasons we argue for not doing behavior evaluations until at least day 4, so that we're hoping that we're getting to the point where the dogs have acclimated enough that hopefully the stress levels won't impact significantly on what they do in the behavior evaluations. No one has looked at stress levels in emergency shelters yet. That's one of the things that we're hoping to do. We're partnering up with a researcher at Iowa State, and we're going to start looking at that to see if we're in a situation that's significantly different from normal shelters. So any enrichment program should be focused on outcome, because what we want to do is make sure that we're implementing things that actually do have a beneficial effect on the animals. So the goal for enrichment is to improve the biological functioning of animals, resulting from things that we're introducing into their environment. And so enrichment programs should be thoughtfully implemented and then monitored for their effectiveness. The goal is not only to mitigate the current stress, but also to protect animals from future stressors as well. So what are we looking to accomplish? We're looking to prevent or reduce any kinds of abnormal behaviors that we're seeing in the animals, anything that we would consider maladaptive. We're looking to increase behavioral diversity, because if we're giving them opportunities to be dogs and cats, then clearly we're going to be looking for more behavior, a wider range or expression of normal behaviors. Basically, the goal should be to have the behavior of animals in a shelter be quite similar qualitatively and quantitatively to animals living in pet home environments. So the other aspect that is helpful in making arguments for enrichment programs is that by reducing stress and increasing normal species-typical behavior, you typically see improvements in physiological health as well. So it's boosting their immune system and helping them fight off physical disease. And also, enrichment programs improve chances for adoption for a variety of reasons. Just the perception by potential adopters is very helpful. Plus, if the dogs and cats are benefiting from it, then their behavior is changing and making them more appealing to adopters. Adopters in general tend to be attracted more to animals that are in complex environments than in very sterile, impoverished situations. It's also very, very good for staff. It encourages positive interactions between the staff and the animals when they're providing the enrichment, and it makes staff feel good because they feel like they're contributing to the welfare of the animal. We always recommend using some kind of rotation schedule, because one of the big things that impedes the benefits of enrichment is habituation. So dogs and cats do get tired of the same thing, and so it's really helpful to have a rotation schedule so you can keep everything relatively novel for the animals. The types of enrichment that I'm going to cover: physical space, what we can do to the inside of the cages and enclosures to make them more interesting and appealing, foraging, problem-solving type activities, sensory stimulation, opportunities for play, both object play and interactive play, training, which provides the animal with some control over their environment, and then social interaction. So we're going to talk about each of these. Another aspect that you'll, I'm sure, appreciate, and we certainly do in our emergency shelters, is that we're always trying to come up with ideas that are inexpensive or free. It's the medical staff require that everything we do be easily, or the objects that we use be easily disinfected. It's helpful to have them easily disposable. Clearly they have to be safe for the animals, and we can tell you about lots of things that we've tried that turned out to be at least potentially not safe. Great to have things available in bulk, and then of course we want them to be effective. When it comes to physical space, there are certainly standards that say that what we should be working to achieve, and Lila Miller has mentioned over and over again, avoiding overcrowding in shelter animals. The animal needs enough space to stand up, to lie down comfortably, to turn around, to walk several steps, to stretch fully, and then some way to retreat if there's something stressful going on. So clearly, a situation like you see in the picture is not acceptable for shelter animals. The enclosures are too small. There's no ability for the animal to separate functional areas for resting and sleeping, or resting and eating and drinking and elimination, and then providing any kind of opportunity for movement. Suzanne Hetz did a study some time ago where she looked at laboratory beagles, and she observed their behavior in a variety of different types of enclosures, including very small cages, and then indoor runs and indoor-outdoor areas. And basically what she found is that when dogs were housed in these very small confined spaces, they spent much more time being inactive than the dogs in the other areas. They spent more time pacing in the area they did have, and they spent more time licking the bars. And that's certainly something we've seen in our emergency shelters, particularly our disaster response shelters, where we really are in a situation where the animals are in less desirable housing for periods of time. Cats need at least 20 inches between functional areas in order to be able to separate out where they're eliminating and where they're sleeping and where they're eating and drinking. One of the nice things is that we can affect larger spaces simply by introducing furnishings to the cage to make it a more complex environment. So anytime you can add perches or platforms, shelves, anything like that will increase and diversify space. It provides a vantage point for animals, which they appreciate. In general, cages are going to be kept cleaner and drier when you have any kind of elevated places for the animals. And you know, we certainly accept that for cats, but we don't think about it as much for dogs. But one study showed that dogs that were in kennels where there was an elevated platform, they spent about 55% of their time on that platform, both for resting and for a vantage point for observation. So it's important for dogs too. Obviously, when you're introducing these kinds of things, it provides more complexity to the environment very easily, and you increase the functional space in the area. Animals are then more able to space themselves out, which means you're going to get lower conflict behaviors in group-housed animals when you provide these spaces. So this is very simple examples. This was a case that we did a couple of years ago where it was a rescue sanctuary that wasn't taking adequate care of their cats, and we went in and removed the cats from the property and ended up with 700 cats for over 6 months in an emergency shelter situation. The nice thing was we ended up taking over what had been an animal control facility, but they had built a new one, and so we were able to take over an actual brick and mortar shelter for these cats. And so we ended up retrofitting the dog kennels, which were indoor-outdoor kennels for the cats, and we could group house a large majority of these cats in the runs. So they did have indoor-outdoor access, which was lovely, but they were just barren runs. And again, when you're dealing with 700 cats, you can't afford all sorts of wonderful cat condo things and everything. So we relied on dog crates where we'd take the tray and put it on top of the crate as well. So there's a platform right there. These are just industrial buckets from the hardware store that were like 50 cents, I think, and we just stuck them on the wall, and cats would sit on top of them or lie in them, and then we used pillowcases and rope for hammocks. That was easy. Milk crates were great. The other thing that we did, because we wanted them to have soft stuff to rest on, but again, we had 700 cats, so we couldn't afford beds for them all, and then they'd be soiled and we'd have to throw them away. We ended up going to the department store and finding these picnic foam placemats, and they're about that big, and we would just cut them in threes, and because they were foam, they were disinfectable because they had some kind of finish on them, and the cats loved them. So it was very easy. We'd put one on top and one inside, and then we have a comfortable place. These were a little more expensive, but still, you could get little plastic things at the hardware store for a few dollars. The metal ones were a little more expensive, but they were sturdier. And again, you see the padding things in there to make them more comfortable. These were all things that we could have disinfected as needed. We did use some things that once they needed to be clean, they were just thrown out. But as long as the cats were in the same area and kept it clean, they retained their own beds. It was around Easter time, so we could get bulk Easter baskets for like pennies, and we would just zip tie them. Every run had an area for a food trough thing, so we just sit the Easter basket on top of that and zip tie it to the door, and it was an elevated area for the cats, and they seemed to really love those. We, as I said, we couldn't afford kitty condo things, fancy ones, but again, we wanted to come up with something, so we ended up using airline crates, which we had plenty of because we had taken 700 cats off the property, so we had at least 700 crates. And so we just used double-sided Velcro and stuck them together, and then the top one, we would remove the roof, so we effectively had a condo. And the only part that was difficult was sometimes they would tip over. So we had to we tried zip tying them to the walls and things, to the mesh. But even if they fell over, the cats still used them. They didn't really seem to care. And you can also see there's a hide, perch, and go box, which we used a little bit. They're expensive, so we couldn't use a lot of them, and also because these were indoor-outdoor runs, and it was Florida, so it rained heavily at least 10 minutes every day, so we would have to make sure that the hide, perch, and go boxes were inside, not outside, and then typically, within a few days, a cat would crush it, and that would be the end of it. So we relied more on grocery bags and boxes than we did on hide, perch, and go boxes, just regular boxes. We went to the grocery store and told them our situation, and they gave us about 4,000 grocery bags for nothing, which was wonderful. This is just a little plastic stool that the cat now has a place to hide and a place to sit on top. So these things are very, very important for the cats and dogs that are fearful and need a place to go. We identified dogs in our last two cases where we've finally given them all Kuranda beds, so they all get a bed, which is wonderful because we didn't used to be able to do that. So they all get a Kuranda bed, but every now and then we have a dog that that is nervous in the beginning and figures out a way to climb under the Kuranda bed, and it doesn't move, and he's squashed in there, and then someone will come along and go, oh my God, the dog has escaped. And you look under, and there's the dog under the Coranda bed. So whenever we see that, we always make sure we give those dogs airline crates that they can hide in as well. We had a whole ward of cats that were considered feral or unsocialized cats in this case. But again, we were in Florida, so we had lots of palm trees and palm fronds, and so we put palm fronds on the front on both sides, the door and the outside front of the runs, and the cats had a natural area where they could peek through, but they could also hide behind. So it was a good solution, good cheap solution. If you do have the funding, it's great to have a real-life room in your shelter and rotate animals through there. It provides a temporary quiet respite for animals that are used to living in a home, so it feels more normal. And then for animals that have not ever been in a home, it helps acclimate them to what they're going to experience once they're adopted. And certainly if you have this area open for viewing to potential adopters, in general, adopters find animals more appealing when they see them in this kind of home situation. They're more able to visualize that animal in their own home. Obviously, we don't always have the luxury of fancy places for the cats, and this is not ideal because there's not enough space for this cat, but still I thought it was a very good attempt in that there's an elevated platform, the towel provides a place where the cat can hide behind, and the food is distinct from move as far away as possible from the litter box, so it's a decent attempt. We had some cats that we couldn't house in the group housing situation. We actually had a population that came from a trailer on the property that were always kept inside, so we kept those animals separate, and we ended up keeping them in dog crates, but we used large dog crates, and as you can see, we did the same kind of thing. So there's a place for the cat to hide, there's a place for him to perch, there's another perch. This isn't far enough apart, but it's the best that we had available. And then we have a hanging toy there as well that I'll talk about in a minute. Animals should be provided with some form of soft bedding. It provides comfort for the animal. It helps them thermoregulate. It helps differentiate these different areas for the animal. So it identifies a resting area. And it does provide the opportunity for animals to show some of those behaviors they wouldn't be able to otherwise show, like digging in the material and nesting in it and hiding under it and so forth. If you're co-housing animals, very important to make sure they're sufficient so that one animal doesn't end up monopolizing all the bedding. Cats seem to prefer fleecy type bedding to less textured fabrics. And the most important thing about bedding that has been revealed in research is that animals are more likely to spend longer periods of time in deep sleep if they have soft bedding. And we all know that that contributes tremendously to mental and physical health. Cats in particular need opportunities for scratching. And so if you can afford them, the plastic scratchers are still a really good option, and they're very easy to dispose of, and they're easy to position in places. But you can also use carpet remnants. And the other thing that we found cats used a lot is we just went to the hardware store and got scrub brushes and zip-tied those to the wall, and the cats could allogroom on them, and they really did use them a lot. If you have cats that don't seem to recognize the scratching post, you can rub catnip on it or dangle a toy near it as a way to try and encourage them to use it. So I mentioned co-housing already, but I just want to focus a little more on what's been found. Virtually every study that has looked at comparing animals, or at least dogs, in co-housed situations versus single-housed has found tremendous benefits. Dogs sleep more, they vocalize less, they show fewer stereotypical behaviors, abnormal behaviors, they spend more time running and playing, they spend more time sniffing, they spend more time urine marking than animals that are singly housed. The group-housed animals are adopted more quickly than single-housed animals. The adopters report that their decisions were based more on the behavior of the animal rather than its appearance when animals are group-housed. The studies find lower return rates for animals that were group-housed, and also they report fewer behavior problems post-adoption in animals that had been group-housed in the shelter. One study compared animals that were in pairs versus animals that were in larger groups of 5 to 11 dogs, and found that it wasn't any more effective to have a larger group. So if you're only able to pair house, you'll get the majority of the benefits from pair housing. If you don't have the option of co-housing in your shelter, at least we know it's beneficial to provide animals with visual contact, certainly in dogs, even though you may get some dogs that become reactive. Given a choice, they always prefer to be able to see other dogs than not. So this is something we struggle with all the time in our emergency shelters, particularly with the fighting dogs, because they can be so reactive that the tendency is to want to cover them up and put them in solitary confinement so they can't see anything. But you know, the reactivity is there, the barking is there, but in general, their mental health is protected more when they're provided that opportunity. Even though we think of cats as being asocial, they do have a flexible social system, so many cats adapt well to co-housing. But it's important to realize that cats don't have the same repertoire of behaviors that dogs do for reducing conflict. So dogs have a lot of body language that can turn off. The idea is to turn off any kind of potential aggression. Cats don't have that. What cats have is distance. That's what they rely on to reduce conflict. So it's very, very important that you not overcrowd the cats because they need that ability to space themselves out to reduce conflict. So in general, the studies indicate that they need at least 3 feet of personal space, and that even if you have a huge space, a group of cats should not be larger than 10 to 15, because that would be larger than what we would see in cats that live in feral situations around a food source. Okay, social interaction. Certainly it's considered one of the most generally beneficial forms of enrichment for social species because you get a lot of bang for your buck. It provides mental stimulation, provides some level of physical exercise as well, opportunities for play, for contact, tactile comfort, for sensory stimulation, and also to some degree novelty. So those are all potential benefits. Clearly, you've got animals that vary in how much they desire interaction. So this is a dog-centric slide, but some animals are going to be oriented towards conspecifics. They are social with their own, but not necessarily with humans. Others are very much human-oriented. That's what they want to interact with. And then some animals are going to be social with both species, which is great. And then we have some that, the under-socialized animals that really don't appear to find it pleasant or pleasurable to interact with people or their own kind. So it is a little bit of an individual assessment to determine exactly what is going to be pleasurable for the animal and beneficial. When dogs are social, play groups can be a wonderful opportunity. It can be an alternative to co-housing if you can't do co-housing, but it also can be an adjunct even if they are co-housed because they're getting to interact with more dogs, they're developing more skills. So it can be extremely beneficial. You're getting physical exercise because the dogs are able to play, which is way more exhausting than what we can do walking them or playing with toys with them. It's mentally stimulating because they're able to engage in all the social behaviors that would be normal. They are getting socialized with other dogs, but they're also getting socialized with people because there's people in the area as well. The people are able to do some training with them, at least in terms of basic manners, so the dogs are learning not to jump up and not to mouth people. You're maximizing your resources because you get a lot of dogs exercise potentially with only a couple of people in a short period of time. And in general, the anecdotal reports are that dogs that engage regularly in playgroup sessions are much less likely to be reactive to other dogs behind barriers and then on leash, which certainly doesn't look good when adopters are coming into the shelter. And then if you are co-housing, it's a great way to figure out which dogs might be compatible. We do a lot, as soon as our quarantine period is up in our emergency shelters, we try to do a lot of play sessions, particularly with our young fighting dogs, to try and regain any dog skills they may have learned as puppies, but then they were separated and not given any contact. Sometimes they're not so comfortable with it at first either, so we do rely on muzzles as needed, and very quickly we usually get those muzzles off. So this girl is wearing a muzzle, and they were presumably litter mates on the site, but they were separated, and then they were separated at the shelter, so they really didn't know each other well at all, and it didn't go well the first couple times, but they all learned to, there were 4 of them, and they all learned to play together beautifully. Come on. For dogs that can't be exercised with other dogs, certainly if you have the resources, it's great to be able to give those dogs opportunities for off-leash play with people. And just the simple thing of having 2 tennis balls and throwing one in one direction, and then when they come back throwing it in the other, they learn to play fetch, they learn to drop toys, and you can wear a dog out pretty effectively. We occasionally have dogs that in our emergency shelters that aren't really interested in playing with toys. They're not social with people. And finally, we ended up convincing the sheltering staff that this would be a good option. How come it's not playing? I can't get it to go back or forward. There we go. Okay, there it is. It's a little noisy. It was controversial at first because people said, well, it's dog fighters run their dogs on treadmills. We can't be dog fighters. But obviously a lot of people run their dogs on treadmills. They may be human treadmills as opposed to dog treadmills, but we end up seizing these things as evidence, so we might as well put them to use. So some of the dogs get regular treadmill sessions, and particularly if they had been in a fighting situation, they're used to it. They know what it's like, and they seem to really enjoy it. So clearly, you're getting a lot of benefits from human socialization. All contact with the animals obviously should be positive and consistent and least restrictive handling kinds of things, humane handling, because anything that involves any kind of rough treatment, of course, is going to increase stress. So the goal here is to all be very gentle and calm and help dogs have positive associations with people. There's plenty of individual differences in terms of what dogs like. Some are going to want to be cuddled, some are going to want to be played with, and so there's that individual variation. But a couple of studies, one study looked at exposing dogs to a painful veterinary procedure. It was a necessary veterinary procedure. And then after that, some of the dogs received a socialization session with a person, some with another dog, and some got nothing. And they looked at stress levels and cortisol. They looked at behavior indications of stress and cortisol levels after that experience. And basically the contact with people abated the stress that they experienced from the veterinary procedures. So their cortisol levels did not go up the same way as the control dogs did, and also they didn't seem to benefit from contact with another dog after that. It was very specific to contact with people. Dogs that expect to be interacted with will spend more time in front of their cages. Unfortunately, they spend more time barking as well, unless the interaction is contingent. And we do know that if people are trained to interact contingently with the dogs, that they will learn to come to the front of the cage and sit and be calm, as opposed to barking and jumping up. But it does have to be contingent in order to get that. Another study looked at taking the dogs out for their socialization sessions and did not require that contingent interaction in the kennel, and those dogs were more active anytime people came. They certainly spent more time in the front of the cages, but it was jumping up and barking, so it didn't improve their adoptability. But in general, adopters want animals that do come to the front of the cage when they come up. They like animals that have toys in their cages, even if they're not playing with them, and they like dogs that sit and don't bark. So the other thing that that study found is that if you have a meeting room where adopters can take the animal to interact with before making a decision, dogs at least that are familiar with that room are more likely to be adopted than dogs that aren't. Puppies and kittens need extra attention, and I think sometimes they get short shrift, usually because they're in an area where they're not as accessible to everybody. You have to have special protective clothing, and also the idea is that, well, they're with their litter mates, so they're getting lots of enrichment already. But in order for them to become good, confident, behaviorally stable animals, you want to get them You want to get them interacted with on an individual basis. So we do a lot of handling with the puppies and kittens right from the very beginning, individually and in handfuls. With the puppies, we do the early neurological stimulation exercises, which take literally just a couple of minutes, but is a good way to get them comfortable with handling on their bodies. When they get older, we do restraint training as well to make sure the puppies are comfortable being restrained, and the kittens too, but that's less of an issue for them than the puppies. So they learn that restraint is okay, that they should relax. They get some bite inhibition training in combination with this, so they learn to modulate their mouthing, which is all good. And that's the easiest thing to get volunteers for, obviously, too. I mean, everybody wants to play with the puppies and kittens. So. Training, I already talked about a bit yesterday, so I can go over that pretty briefly. But again, it's believed to be a very powerful form of enrichment because it gets at so many different things. But so far, we haven't gotten a lot of research on the benefits of training. One study showed that dogs that were given basic obedience training were 1.5 times more likely to be adopted than dogs that didn't get that training. But certainly the idea is that they're gaining skills, so that should make them more adoptable. And it's also providing dogs with control over their environment, which is an important factor when it comes to improving their overall well-being. Certainly in our situations, the daily care staff report that the more the dogs have basic training, the easier it is and more efficient it is for them to do their job. Certainly, it's not just dogs. There are a number of programs now that look at training cats in the shelter, and particularly clicker training and target training, so the cats are getting comfortable coming up to the front of the cage, which, again, for adoption is important. Leash walking, you can put it under the exercise component or the mental stimulation component and the training component, because clearly you're giving them physical exercise, you're giving them mental stimulation, they're getting socialized because there's a person on the end of that leash, and it's skill-based, so presumably attractive to adopters. The only concern that you want to think about or consideration is when it happens, because if you have a great volunteer program and they're there walking the animals all the time during adoption hours, well, half the time your cages are empty when people come to look. So either it's important to either get those walks in at the times when the adoption center is not open, or make sure that people are walking the animals where the adopters are going to encounter them, because that way you're actually increasing exposure to potential adopters and they're seeing the animals, again, in a more naturalistic situation. Play is considered a luxury behavior. So the idea is that if an animal is suffering, has poor welfare, is not going to be likely to play. So providing animals opportunity to play gives you a good gauge on how they are feeling. We do a lot with object play, but placing toys in cages apparently has very little effect on activity level, and animals habituate to toys very quickly, at least in terms of the couple of studies that have been done. One study compared giving the dogs nylobones, these big boomer balls, squeaky toys, and a rope toy, and they varied the order and gave them for a period of time, and the dogs habituated to all the toys pretty rapidly, but they found the nylabone maintained interest the longest, and then of course the boomer balls elicited the most movement. But anecdotally, I can say, at least with pit bulls, the boomer balls and these egg-shaped balls and things, I mean, they even when they have them in their cages, they don't seem to ever tire from them. They just keep playing, and we have to take them away because the dogs get overheated and they're panting and they're exhausted, and the only way they'll stop playing is to take the toy away. I'm sure we're dealing with a slightly different population than normal dogs, but we find that they do not habituate much at all. But important to trade them out. The study did find that toys that hang from the cages seem to maintain interest longer. So even 2 months later, animals were playing with toys that were hanging from the cage. So if you can get that approved by your medical people, which we used to be able to, but now can't, that can be a good thing. The other thing you see in this picture is a mom with her puppies. That's something that it's not necessarily enrichment focused, but I wanted to mention it. Because these animals are in small cages with their litter, it's really important to provide opportunities for the mom to get away from the puppies. So we use kittens. We use kiddie pools when the puppies are small enough that they can't get out of it. And so the mom has a space that she has of her own, and she can go in when she wants to. And then when the puppies are big enough to get in and out of the kiddie pool, well, then we usually put in an airline crate or something with soft bedding on top so the mom can jump up on it. And then we start introducing a weaning schedule so the mom gets away for periods of time every day. Cats, obviously, there's lots of commercially available toys that will maintain their interest at least for periods of time. But when you have 700 cats, toys don't have to cost a lot, just crumpled up pieces of paper. These, again, I mentioned it was Easter. We got these for a penny or two a piece, and they're just like little plastic Easter egg things that we could put stuff in. We could put catnip in it or little bits of treats, and they would bang them around and eventually get them to open up. Interactive play is socialization as well as mental stimulation, and these were just feathers that came off the Kong foraging toys. So that was easy. Bubbles are cheap as anything, and cats love them. They just have to have a person to provide them, but great form of enrichment, especially on a breezy day. Laser toys, very popular with a lot of cats, and again, with 700 cats, we didn't always have enough people to do that, but they do make these fancy remote-controlled ones, so we would just sit it in front of a couple of cages, and it would go back and forth and up and down and around, and the cats in the cages would chase them, and then after a few minutes, we'd move it somewhere else. Okay, as usual, I'm going to run out of time. Foraging activities, probably the most common form of enrichment that shelters are doing now. It focuses on the handling aspect of the feeding process. So we do a lot of Kong stuffing and wobblers and all those kinds of wonderful puzzle toys and food toys that you can get. They tend to be consumable by most pit bulls, sadly. The Kongs are pretty good, but we had one dog eat a wobbler last time, so that's not so good. So we rely a lot on pupsicles, we call them, instead of popsicles. We just, small metal bowls, we put in some kibble and some treats and fill it up with chicken stock or something and put it in the freezer, and that's how they get their meal. We just dump it out of the bowl, and they have this messy glob on the floor. Chewing is extremely important for dogs, very, very important. Of course, again, that can be expensive. It depends on what your medical staff will approve. We use antlers and those Durasticks and knuckle bones, and dogs will spend a long time occupying themselves each day chewing. A little harder, more challenging for the cats, but again, there's a lot of commercial products available for puzzle toys for cats. These are just, we did the same kind of thing as the pupsicles with cats. We'd put some wet food and some tuna or something into just water bottle caps and little drops or two of chicken stock and freeze them, and that was their food enrichment toy, or just simply water bottles that they can bang around and get the treats out of. How much time do I have left? None? Couple minutes. Okay, couple minutes. I think we're almost there. Okay, sensory stimulation, clearly, again, we're trying to increase behavioral diversity, so, and relieve boredom, so anything we can do in that regard can be potentially beneficial. We got our commercially available videos for dogs and cats. One study looked at dogs. They put TVs in the shelter, and the dogs either had a blank screen as the control, or they could watch a video with dogs moving around, or one with other species moving around, or then people in a typical home setting moving around. They didn't orient to the TV very much at all, like 5% of their time in the beginning, and that was only for the first hour or so, and then interest waned even more than that. But movement was the critical factor. It didn't matter what species, as long as there was something moving. But again, we don't think dogs' visual systems are set up very well for TV. So some dogs seem to enjoy it, but other dogs not so much. Cats are a little more inclined to watch it. It reduces the amount of time they spend in the back of the cage, or hiding or resting, less sleeping. But again, the effects can be kind of temporary, so it may not be worth the investment for a shelter on limited resources, but if you have it, go for it. It can't hurt. Cheap things can be visually stimulating. Again, we weren't going to put TVs in for 700 cats, but we had these little, I can't even remember what they're called. What are they called? Pinwheel things. Anyway, so you got some breeze, you got that, the cats watched them. We also had water troughs for cleaning on the outside of the kennels, and so every afternoon for about 10-15 minutes we would turn the water on, and the cats would sit and watch the water go past, so that was easy. Music. Again, shelters are noisy places, and so is there anything we can provide in terms of helping the animals de-stress noise-wise? So Deborah Wells looked at classical music for dogs, pop music, heavy metal, talk radio. And pop music and talk radio had no discernible effect on behavior. They seemed to rest more and bark less with classical, and they barked more and moved more with heavy metal. But I can tell you that a lot of staff do not want to listen to classical music all day long. I've had people say, can you just slit my wrist now because I can't deal with this anymore. So you have to balance that out. There's some commercially available calming music on the market. None have been subjected to scientific evaluation, so we have no idea if they're any more beneficial. Sound, because shelters are so noisy, sometimes no sound is the most beneficial thing. They haven't looked at it with shelter animals, but in some laboratory species, including primates, they prefer silence to even classical, low-tempo classical music. So we always incorporate a bit of what we call Zen time into our shelter, sort of after the cleaning is done and the feeding is done. Lunchtime for staff is Zen time for the dogs. So that's when we put on just very low volume classical, or try to keep everything as quiet as possible. We dim the lights a little bit. We do not turn the lights off because you don't want to mess up their circadian rhythms. And we've had arguments about that because I was coming into the emergency shelters and finding out that the dogs were expected to nap at lunchtime and they turned all the lights out. So dimming is okay, but not off completely. Smells, again, a little bit of research. Lavender, chamomile supposedly calm dogs. They bark less. They investigated a little bit. Rosemary and peppermint, they moved around more. So it seemed to be excitatory. When they looked at cats, they found, not surprisingly, that catnip was the most stimulating thing. Cinnamon and ginger also seemed to have some excitatory effects with cats. There wasn't anything that really showed calming as much with cats. We use animal scents as well, assuming they tend to be excitatory. There hasn't been any research on whether or not dogs find them interesting. Cats didn't show any appreciable response to them. But we do know from the rehab center stuff is that if we put animal scents on grass, the dogs will roll in them for sure. And I don't know if you have access to the same kinds of things. If we go to the hunting store, you can get ode to deer urine, estrus deer urine even, raccoon urine, and fox and coyote and all kinds of things. So there's lots of variation there. And they smell disgusting. They absolutely smell horrible to people. So last thing on enrichment is the pheromones. The research is very mixed on feel-away and dog appeasement pheromone. They're purported to reduce fear and anxiety and stress-related behaviors. One study showed that they aided in puppy socialization and adjustment to new environments, that the puppies were more comfortable. One study at least showed that in shelter dogs there was less barking and more resting, but that was after 7 days of exposure. They had to be exposed to it for that time. And in general, the possibility is that they may be effective, but there's so much stimulation in a shelter environment that the effects just get mitigated, or there's so many air exchanges in the room that it just goes out the window. So that's something that's an individual thing. You have to decide if it's worth the cost to do it. And that is the end, except that I was going to try and squeeze this in again, and I didn't get to it. Tomorrow. We'll have to find some way to get cat behavior evaluations in. But thank you very much for your attention.